when the HOA president set out to evict him. She had no clue she was stepping into her own worst nightmare. Malik Patterson had long envisioned owning a home in an upscale, tranquil neighborhood. Years of dedication finally turned that dream into reality. His new residence, a breathtaking 2-story brick house in Brentwood Estates, Tennessee, boasted a manicured lawn, a wraparound porch, and an expansive backyard. It was everything he had imagined: serene, sophisticated, and ideal for laying down roots. Yet, from the moment he arrived, something felt off. With moving boxes still stacked in the driveway, he noticed the stairs, curtains shifting, eyes peering, neighbors lingering just a little too long while walking their dogs. No introductions, no warm welcomes, just an unsettling silence. At first, he brushed it off, assuming people here were simply reserved. Maybe, in time, they'd come around. That illusion shattered the next morning. Malik had barely poured his coffee when a sharp knock broke the quiet. Opening the door, he found a woman in her mid-60s standing on his porch. Dressed in a crisp beige blouse, pearl earrings, and a cardigan pinned with the HOA emblem, she stood stiffly, her expression neutral, but something in her eyes felt calculating. "Good morning," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm Barbara Whitman, president of the Brentwood Estates Homeowners Association." Malik extended his hand with a polite smile. "Nice to meet you. I know who you are," she interjected, her gaze flicking past him into the house. "I wanted to discuss a few things." She thrust a thick packet of printed guidelines into his hands. As he flipped through the pages, he skimmed the expected rules: lawn care standards, mailbox designs, exterior paint restrictions, routine HOA policies. But then Barbara cleared her throat. "We like to uphold a certain standard here," she said, her eyes drifting toward the moving truck still in the driveway. "I assume it will be gone by this evening." Malik arched a brow. "Once I'm done unpacking, yes." Barbara nodded, though it wasn't a nod of approval, more like a mental tally. "Good," she said flatly. "And just so you're aware, trash bins cannot be placed at the curb before 6 a.m. on collection day. I noticed yours were out last night." "I didn't put them out," Malik replied evenly. "That must have been the previous owners." Barbara pursed her lips. "I see. Well, in the future, please be mindful. We have rules for a reason." With that, she turned and walked away. Malik exhaled slowly as he shut the door. Maybe she was just particular. HOA presidents often were. He wasn't about to let one rigid neighbor taint his fresh start. But the following days proved Barbara was more than just meticulous. She was watching. A warning notice appeared in his mailbox about an unauthorized vehicle in his driveway, his own car. Then came another about improper lawn maintenance, his grass, barely an inch longer than before. By midweek, an official violation letter arrived regarding a porch light deemed too bright, despite being the same fixture the previous owner had. By the end of the week, Malik had accumulated a neat stack of notices from Barbara. He hadn't spoken to her since their first meeting. But clearly, she had made up her mind about him. But it didn't matter. She had made her presence known. Still, Malik kept his composure. Maybe this was just how she treated everyone. Maybe if he followed the rules, she'd ease up. But that hope vanished quickly. One evening, while out for a walk, Malik passed a group of neighbors chatting in a nearby driveway. The conversation hushed the moment they spotted him. One woman forced a tight smile, but the rest pretended he wasn't there. And in the center of it all stood Barbara, arms crossed, whispering to the others. Malik didn't need to hear what was being said. This wasn't about HOA policies. It was about him. If Barbara thought she could push him out, she was in for a rude awakening. The letters kept coming. Every morning, a fresh notice appeared in his mailbox, neatly folded and stamped with the Brentwood Estates HOA seal. At first, he barely glanced at them, tossing them in a kitchen drawer. He already knew what they said. Barbara Whitman was determined to make his life a nightmare. But when the fifth letter arrived in just 2 weeks, Malik had had enough. This time, it was about his trash cans. Bins must be retrieved within 1 hour of collection to maintain neighborhood aesthetics, the letter read. Malik clenched his jaw. He had picked up his bins the same way his neighbors had, after work. But somehow, that wasn't acceptable for him. Curious, he decided to run a little test. The next morning, he took a slow walk around the neighborhood, scanning every house. By 9 a.m., dozens of trash bins still lined the curbs, some overflowing with loose bags, lids propped open. Yet, not a single violation notice in sight. Just his. Snapping a few pictures, Malik sent a polite email to the HOA board, questioning why his bins were a problem when everyone else's weren't. No response. But 2 days later, Barbara was back. This time, she didn't knock. She just stood there, arms folded, clipboard in hand, waiting. Malik opened the door and leaned against the frame. Something I can help you with? Barbara didn't reply immediately. Instead, she peered past him, scanning his home like she was taking stock of everything inside. Then, she lifted a form. This is a formal request for proof of home ownership, she announced. We've received complaints. Malik's stomach tightened. Complaints. Neighbors have raised concerns, Barbara continued, her voice sugary yet sharp. They've noticed unusual activity, different cars coming and going, furniture deliveries at odd hours. Some worry you may be renting this property in violation of HOA regulations. A short, amused laugh escaped Malik. You're kidding. Barbara's face remained unreadable. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. First off, I own this house. Second, I've been here less than a month. I'm still moving in. That's why there have been deliveries. And cars. Friends and family visiting. Barbara's grip on her clipboard tightened. We have policies to ensure all homeowners are properly vetted. We'll need to verify your deed. Malik knew exactly what this was. She hadn't asked any other neighbors for proof. Just him. Still, he kept his voice even. You can pull the records yourself. It's public information. Barbara's eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly masked it, smoothing out her expression. I'd prefer if you submitted it directly. Malik tilted his head. And if I don't? Her lips curled into what was supposed to be a smile, but there was no warmth behind it. Then I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter to the HOA board. Malik exhaled slowly, biting back the words sitting at the tip of his tongue. She wanted him to react, to raise his voice, to become the problem. Instead, he simply smiled. I'll think about it, he said, then shut the door before she could add anything else. Barbara didn't like that. That evening, as Malik sat on his porch sipping a beer, he spotted her again, this time at the edge of his driveway, speaking in hushed tones to a man in a polo shirt and khakis. She gestured toward Malik's house, while the man nodded, jotting something down on a notepad. Malik didn't have to guess what was happening. Barbara wasn't just trying to intimidate him anymore. She was plotting. But if she thought she could force him out, she was about to learn a tough lesson. The next morning, Malik woke up to an email from the HOA. Subject: Notice of violation. His porch furniture, 2 wicker chairs and a small glass table, was not in compliance with HOA aesthetic standards. A vague rule, one that clearly wasn't being enforced on anyone else. Malik leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had walked this neighborhood enough times to know at least a dozen homes had similar setups. Some even had faded plastic chairs that looked like they'd been there since the early 2000s. Yet, somehow, his was a problem. He ignored the notice. The next day, another email arrived. Subject: Second notice, lawn maintenance violation. Malik frowned. His lawn was freshly cut, edges trimmed, hedges neatly shaped. He had spent an entire afternoon making sure everything looked spotless. Yet there it was, a formal complaint claiming his grass was slightly overgrown, with a warning that fines could follow if he didn't correct the issue. He knew exactly what was happening. Barbara was trying to drown him in violations, stacking up minor infractions until she had enough leverage to push things further. So Malik decided to play her game. That evening, he took a slow walk through the neighborhood, jotting down every actual violation he saw: overgrown yards, broken shutters, faded house numbers, trash bins still sitting out from the day before. Then, he submitted his own complaints, each one backed with time-stamped photos. Less than 24 hours later, Barbara was back. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her at the edge of Malik's driveway was another HOA board member, an older man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard in hand. Malik recognized him from the HOA website. Stephen Reynolds, Vice President. Barbara's expression was even tighter than usual, her forced politeness barely concealing her irritation. "Mr. Patterson," she greeted, her voice stretched thin. "We've reviewed your list of complaints." Malik crossed his arms, nodding. "Good. Then you know I'm not the only one being held to ridiculous standards." Stephen cleared his throat, shooting a quick glance at Barbara before responding. "We appreciate your concerns, but the HOA board determines which infractions warrant action. Not every minor issue requires a formal notice." Malik scoffed. "So mine do, but everyone else's don't." Barbara didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a printed form and handed it to him. "This is your final warning before fines are issued. Your porch furniture must be replaced, and your lawn must remain at the regulated length at all times." Malik stared at the paper, then slowly lifted his gaze to Barbara. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't about grass or furniture. It was about making him feel like he didn't belong. Taking a deep breath, he forced a slow smile. "You know, Barbara, I've read the HOA bylaws top to bottom. Nowhere does it say a homeowner has to replace furniture that's in perfect condition." Barbara stiffened. "It's a matter of neighborhood uniformity." Malik raised an eyebrow. "So you enforce rules that don't actually exist?" Her jaw twitched. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, Malik saw it, doubt creeping into the board member's expression. He wasn't fully convinced. Malik decided to push further. "Let me ask you something," he said, keeping his tone even. "If I were someone else, say one of my neighbors, would we even be having this conversation?" Barbara's nostrils flared. Stephen opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. No answer. Malik nodded, folding the paper in half. "That's what I thought." Barbara inhaled sharply, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "If you refuse to comply, the HOA has the authority to take further action." Malik met her gaze, unwavering. "Then do what you have to do." Barbara turned on her heel, posture stiff, with barely contained frustration. Stephen lingered for a moment before following. Malik watched them go, gripping the violation notice in his hand. He had just called her bluff. But Barbara wasn't the type to back down easily. The next morning, a thick envelope sat in his mailbox. No HOA logo this time. Instead, it was from a law firm. Inside was an official complaint filed with the Davidson County Housing Authority, accusing him of being a fraudulent occupant. Barbara had escalated from petty fines to trying to have him legally removed from his own home. Malik stared at the document, his pulse steady, but his fingers tightening around the paper. She was really doing this. He read through the complaint. The claims were flimsy, allegations that he had failed to provide proof of home ownership, suspicions that he was renting under false pretenses, and vague statements that multiple neighbors had concerns about his presence. No names. No actual evidence. Just assumptions dressed up as legal jargon. For a moment, Malik considered ignoring it. The accusations wouldn't hold up. But then it hit him. This wasn't about getting him evicted. It was about exhausting him. Barbara wanted him buried in legal headaches. She wanted him drained, frustrated, willing to walk away rather than fight back. What she didn't realize, she was playing right into his hands. That evening, Malik made a call. "Hey, Joe," he said when the line picked up. "I need a favor." Joe Martinez had been Malik's real estate attorney for years. Sharp, relentless, and twice as ruthless as Barbara could ever hope to be. By the next morning, Malik had everything he needed. And he wasn't just going to defend himself. He was about to turn the tables. 3 days later, the HOA emergency board meeting was packed. Barbara sat at the head of the long conference table, her expression carefully neutral. The other board members flanked her, some looking uncomfortable, others pretending to be busy with their notes. The room buzzed with whispers. Homeowners shifted in their seats, glancing between Malik and the board. They had all heard the rumors. They were waiting for a showdown. Barbara cleared her throat, lifting a printed document. "We are here to address the ongoing issue regarding Mr. Patterson's residence," she announced. "Given the numerous violations." Malik stood, his voice steady but firm. "I'm speaking now," he said, placing a stack of documents on the table. Barbara's lips thinned, but she gestured for him to continue. A murmur spread through the room as Malik unfolded the first document. "This," he held up a deed, "is proof that I legally own my home, filed, recorded, and indisputable." Some board members exchanged glances. He placed it down and picked up another paper. "This," he continued, "is the purchase agreement for another property, 214 Oakwood Drive." Barbara's face remained composed, but Malik caught the flicker of confusion in her eyes. Then, he held up the final document. "And this," he said, letting the words sink in, "is the deed for 216 Oakwood Drive, Barbara's house." The silence that followed was deafening. Malik didn't sit, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The same woman who had spent weeks trying to push him out had just discovered that her own home now belonged to him. Barbara's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Finally, she asked, her voice tight, "How?" Malik folded his arms. "You might want to check the HOA records. That foreclosure you ignored. The auction last month. I was the buyer." Gasps rippled through the room. Barbara's grip tightened on the papers in front of her. Malik tilted his head. "So tell me, Barbara, who's the real trespasser now?" The entire room shifted. Barbara's face drained of color, her once unshakable composure starting to crack. The power she had wielded over Malik for weeks had just crumbled in front of everyone. Malik let the moment breathe before picking up another document. "Now, let's talk about fraudulent eviction attempts." Barbara's head snapped up. "Excuse me." Malik tapped the legal complaint she had filed. "You reported me as an illegal occupant. Claimed I had no right to live in my own home." He met her gaze. "Would you care to explain why?" Barbara's fingers twitched, but she kept her voice even. "As I stated in my report, several residents expressed concerns." "Who?" Malik cut in. Barbara's jaw tightened. "I'm not at liberty to disclose." "No names." Malik raised an eyebrow. "That's strange, because I spoke with several neighbors before this meeting. Not one of them remembers expressing concerns." A low murmur spread through the crowd as homeowners exchanged uneasy glances. Barbara opened her mouth to respond, but Malik wasn't finished. "You accused me of violating HOA policies," he said, his voice steady. "Yet you've repeatedly ignored other violations in this community." Malik placed a stack of printed emails on the table. "I filed multiple complaints, broken shutters, overgrown lawns, trash bins left out for days. None of them resulted in violation notices." He turned to the rest of the board. "So tell me, do these rules only apply when Barbara feels like enforcing them?" A tense silence followed. Stephen Reynolds, the HOA vice president, cleared his throat. "I think we should take a moment to—" "No," Malik interrupted, his eyes still locked on Barbara, "because this was never about HOA rules. It was about her deciding who she thinks belongs here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barbara's lips parted, panic flickering across her face. For the first time, she wasn't just being exposed. She was being forced to confront the truth, along with the entire neighborhood. Barbara took a shaky breath. "Mr. Patterson, I was simply trying to—" "Intimidate me into leaving," Malik finished. "Yeah, I got that." Silence. Then, from the back of the room, a voice broke through. "This is a disgrace," an older man muttered. Malik turned. It was Mr. Holloway, one of the neighborhood's longest-standing residents. He shook his head, looking directly at Barbara. "You really try to evict the man who owns your house." A few scattered chuckles echoed through the room. The shift had begun, but Malik wasn't done yet. He placed his final document on the table. "And one more thing, Barbara. You're behind on your HOA fees." Barbara's head snapped up. That's a lie. Malik tapped the paper. I bought your house at auction, remember? That includes any outstanding debt. You owe over $3,000 in unpaid fines and fees. A fresh wave of whispers spread through the room. Stephen adjusted his glasses, frowning as he read over the document. Barbara, is this true? Barbara's lips parted, but no words came out. She had buried herself. Malik leaned back in his chair. I suggest you start paying up. Wouldn't want to violate any of your own rules. Would you? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even some of the board members struggled to contain their reactions. Barbara's face burned red. She had spent weeks trying to control Malik, and now, in front of the entire HOA, her authority had been reduced to nothing. Scrambling for an escape, she snapped, "This meeting is adjourned." Snatching up her papers, she shoved them into a folder and marched toward the exit, heels clicking against the tile. For the first time, no one followed her. Malik exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. He had won, but he knew Barbara wasn't the type to walk away without a fight. The morning after her public humiliation, Malik spotted Barbara at the edge of his driveway. She wasn't alone. Her husband, Richard, stood beside her, stiff posture and a deep scowl etched into his face. Malik stepped onto his porch, arms crossed. "Something I can help you with?" Barbara's voice was tight, controlled. "I want to discuss the sale of my home." He had expected this. The idea of renting from him must have been unbearable for her. "I'm not selling," he said simply. Barbara's jaw clenched. "I've lived in that house for 32 years. Malik tilted his head. "And yet you never paid off the debt attached to it." Richard cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer you a fair price." Malik leaned against the railing. "Define fair." Barbara huffed, her patience wearing thin. "The same amount you paid at auction." Malik let out a short laugh. "That's not how real estate works. You lost your house because of unpaid fees. I legally purchased it. If you want it back, you'll have to buy it at market value." Barbara's hands balled into fists. "That's ridiculous. You're just trying to profit off me." Malik's expression hardened. "No, Barbara. I'm treating you exactly how you treated me." A tense silence stretched between them. For weeks, she had weaponized rules against him, convinced she held all the power. Now, she was the one at someone else's mercy. Richard sighed. "How much?" Malik glanced toward the house. "Given the location, the current market, and your unpaid fees, $415,000. Barbara's face twisted. "That's outrageous." Malik shrugged. "Then I guess you'll have to find somewhere else to live." For the first time, real panic flashed across her face. This was real. She wasn't just losing her title. She was losing her home. Richard rubbed a hand over his face. "We'll consider it." Malik nodded. "Take your time." As they turned to leave, Barbara hesitated. She looked back at him. Something different in her expression. Not quite remorse, but the realization that she had never actually been in control. She had been so focused on pushing him out that she hadn't seen the real danger. Her own actions had cost her everything. Malik let the moment sit before speaking. "Barbara." She turned stiffly. "Next time you judge someone before knowing them." He gestured toward her house. "Remember where it got you?" She didn't reply. She just turned and walked away. A month later, a for sale sign went up in front of 216 Oakwood Drive. Barbara had refused to buy back the house at Malik's price. No bank would give her a loan for what she needed. So she and Richard packed up and left in the middle of the night, moving to a smaller place across town. The neighborhood changed after that. Without Barbara in charge, the HOA finally started working the way it was supposed to, addressing real issues instead of policing nonsense. Some neighbors still avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their silence. But others made an effort. One day, Lisa Hendricks, one of the few who had voted against Barbara, walked up Malik's driveway with a plate of cookies. "I know it's late," she said, shifting awkwardly. "But welcome to the neighborhood." Malik smiled, accepting the plate. "Took you long enough." Lisa chuckled, a little sheepish. Yeah, it did. Malik took a bite. Sweet. A little stale. But better late than never. Some people spend their lives trying to control others. They think power comes from rules, from status, from making others feel small. But real power, that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more. Because trust me, there's plenty more where this came from.